Hey everyone, I'm Diana Davison, advocate for the falsely accused and wrongfully convicted. Now, today I want to read something to you that I find absolutely fascinating. It's from an article published on a site called The Rumpus, published in May of 2018, this year, in which the writer admits to abusive sexual behavior, and The Rumpus has published this in a promotional way. Basically, they're celebrating this behavior in the midst of the MeToo movement, at a time when subtle abuses of control and power have been equated with sexual assault by the very people who now run this publication. It's from a series called Kink, Writing While Deviant. A writer must push his pleasure into risk, expose himself publicly to strangers with no knowledge of how he might be received, and become something that must be seen. The best kind of writing lives at this intersection. Now we can take that metaphorically for now. It's not like he's actually exposing his genitals to unsuspecting strangers, but there's an important issue here in terms of the difference between regular people and writers and the kind of conversations that go on in arts communities. They're just not typical. It's a kind of trade that deals in vulnerability and pushing boundaries, and that's what this column, Writing While Deviant, is trying to promote. In the personal essay, those social boundaries must disintegrate. An exhibitionist and a writer need strangers, not just lovers, to watch. Personal essay writers publish for the thrill in stripping down for a reader. The act feels vulnerable, but the reception is more satisfying because of the risk. Certainly, by May 2018, the Rumpus is well aware that strangers can't consent to exhibitionists using them for their own gratification. And yet this article goes on unapologetically. There are many ways to expose yourself, if willing. I find pleasure in sharing my sexual exploits with friends, just as I do writing about the experiences. I'm a very physically needy person, I always start. Then, after some perverse account over coffee, I stir my cup and shrug as if I've merely recited the weather forecast. This makes me feel powerful for a moment, because the stories are unforgettable. I feel that I have become unforgettable. Sometimes I bring my friends' shocked reactions to the bedroom to share them with my partners, if for nothing else than to extend the pleasure of being seen. Obviously, this is a very narcissistic and abusive thing to do. The author has told us that he is not only foisting his fetish onto non-consenting strangers, but that he's using it for sexual or perverse gratification, with advanced planning. I found myself wondering what makes the difference between a man who would be unpersoned for such conduct and the writer of this article who is apparently being celebrated for the same behavior. Are there some unspoken rules for who can do what that don't involve equality or the fight against patriarchy? Well, let's read on. I want the Facebook comments of my essays to tunnel deep into the webpage, or letters of affection to fill my inbox unending, scripting an analysis of my own work that I cannot. I want my partner to acknowledge me, speak to me, growling, "I love the way you wrap around me, I love the way you're present." The honesty of writers is part of what helps us connect with them. They push their vulnerability on display and admit to things that make the average person blush. That's what sometimes separates great writers from the non-authentic. I'm most memorable in my writing, where I can craft sentences like pulling the moon down on strings. I can cast spells. I can make you see me. I'm an exhibitionist for the same reason. Of course, writers try to be poetic. He's not literally casting a spell. But what is charisma? Isn't that a kind of spell? Don't we often get caught up in sexual magnetism and then wonder what came over us when we responded to it? That this charm, which sometimes is overcompensating for a lack of self-esteem, can sometimes cause us to make poor decisions and end up in bed with a manipulator, is not necessarily to be confused with coercive control. I mean, we're told now that it should, but there is a certain amount of agency in the person buying into the charisma, and that construct shouldn't be discounted. I'm assuming that's why The Rumpus has published and promoted this article. During a conversation in a car with friends, I confessed that I'm often attracted to people in positions of power. The friend who was driving laughed, then said, "Does that mean you're attracted to me?" We laughed, but the car settled into blank silence. Her response wasn't one I'd accounted for, and it felt embarrassing because I was unsure of how to respond. This is, of course, the one threat for an exhibitionist and a writer, to lose our power or control over our audience. Well, that is awkward. The social discourse so far hasn't addressed the fact that many people seek out relationships with people in positions of power. And in the same segment, the underling is admitting that he was seeking control and lost it in some kind of complicated power game. Now, we're about to get more graphic, so bear with me, and remember, this is published as an attempt to promote the author as a vulnerable person. One summer, I dated a married woman whose husband agreed to her seeing other people. He was a nurse who sometimes worked night shifts, which is when I would sleep over. The morning I met him, I woke up on his side of the bed, rolled on top of his wife, and woke her up by going down on her. She was in the middle of a loud orgasm when we heard her husband unlock the front door. She finished as he knocked on the bedroom door, then I wiped my mouth on their sheets and dressed quickly. I left their bedroom and held out my hand for his. "Nice to meet you," I wanted to say. "I just fucked your wife." Instead, I shook his hand and sat next to him at the breakfast bar while his wife made us pancakes. He commented that he liked my suit, that it fit well, and suddenly I felt momentary. He was not the person I wanted to be viewed by. The experience disembodied me from the pleasure of my own kink, which felt just like a critic's bad review. Now at this point, I think we can all agree that this is bad behavior. There is something wrong with it. There is a very complicated power game going on with this author, one that's not being named properly, and it's wrapped up in a bizarre call for sympathy, which comes across a little bit more like entitlement from some kind of blinkered braggart. So why is the Rumpus, a self-described matriarchy, publishing this in the middle of the Me Too movement? It's very confusing, but I have the answer. You see, the article was actually written by a woman. I changed the gender and identifying details, but I'll put the link below, and I've archived it so the Rumpus can't backtrack here. To make matters worse, this same woman wrote a Me Too accusation alleging abuse by a man under far more sketchy circumstances in which there was no admitted power game at play. The main complaint is that this woman, who likes to play control games, alleges a man who she agreed to take money from for sex just wanted the sex and didn't get to know her better. He didn't play her little game. I'll put a link to that article as well. Because where did honesty go? What the hell are we doing here? And when will it end? How can the Rumpus be promoting this woman's abusive behavior as acceptable deviance, while condemning men to permanent unemployability for the same alleged behavior? Well, the answer is simple. The Me Too movement is not honest. Support my work on Patreon. More about the lies of the Me Too movement are to follow.